touch on their marquee games. We will pick 4 each week, and it so happens this week there will be the Sky games for those based in the UK. 49ers at Steelers, Dolphins at Chargers, Cowboys at Giants, Bills at Jets. We actually struggled to whittle this down to 4, as Drew touched on. It's a phenomenal week 1, probably one of the best from living memory anyway over the last few years. But let's get started. 49ers at the Steelers. Let's take a look at the betting that we have a Matchbook betting exchange, which is currently recording this Wednesday afternoon. 49ers are the favorites in the money line, 1.82 to the Steelers, 2.14. The point spread gives the Steelers a 2-point start at 1.92, and the total for this game is 41.0, shaded a little bit towards the over. So, look, Sam, you really wanted to talk about this game. So, look, make the case for the Steelers.
Yeah, so the Steelers, I've gone from being so down on them last season to I'm far too high on them, if I'm honest with you. But I've gone for Steelers +2. I think ultimately they're going to be hugely improved this year. I mean, it can't get much worse than it was at certain points last year, that's for sure. I think Kenny Pickett, he had a really rough season, obviously making his rookie season, but he's had a bit of time off. By all accounts, it seems like he's had a reasonable camp. The offensive line there wasn't amazing last year, but it wasn't quite as bad as I think some have had it advertised as. So I think there's room for growth there. In particular, there's one guy who they drafted this year, Darnell Washington, who I'm absolutely in love with the guy. I think he's going to be a far better real-life player than he is fantasy player before anyone rushes to pick him up. But like, this is a guy who's going to be on the field 24/7 for the Steelers. He could push a lorry over. The guy is just pure brawn, just a giant, to be honest with you. Everything I've seen from training camp, little clips of him just on a lev sled. I'm enjoying watching it. Like that is the level of like obsession I've got with this guy. So I think he's going to add a lot to their game. He's just going to be able to create holes. I'm just really looking forward to seeing him play. Then you have the receiving core. Obviously, they've got Allen Robinson. He's arrived now. I don't think that's really going to push the needle a huge amount. But George Pickens, he could really take a leap this year. He's got the skill set to be one of the best in the league. We saw some circus catches last year effectively, and there's such potential there. I think he's one of these guys, it could go either way on him, but I'm quite confident that he's going to have a good season. And then you have Deontay Johnson, who, I mean, when you look at his stats last year, if there is a player in the entire league who's primed for positive regression, it is Deontay Johnson, I think. So ultimately, the Steelers, I think, are a team that are potentially look a bit underrated coming into this season. Great coaching, some talent on the roster, incredible defense. I don't think we need to talk about that too much, but that's obviously one of their strong suits against a 49ers team that I felt this way about the 49ers for a while. There's times where I just don't trust them. And right now, I don't totally trust them. I need to see them for a few games before I really buy into them. Brock Purdy, I know Drew mentioned him at the start of the show. I'm still not totally sold on him. I'm really not. I think there's a good chance we see Sam Darnold as a starter before the end of the year, if I'm honest with you. That's one of my hot takes for the season. But yeah, I just think the Steelers, they're a bit underrated, and I think these odds are kind of taking into account what we saw last season a lot more than potentially how these teams line up on Sunday. And for me, I'm not convinced this Niners team are as good as the team at the end of last season, at least not in terms of form or anything like that. Whereas I do think the Steelers are going to be improved. So for me, yeah, I'm just taking the Steelers by the points.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And Judah, I'll go to you next on this one because Sam touched on maybe last season's form. And I guess if you were pricing this up towards the end of last season, maybe 4.5, 5 would be the line here. It's interesting you've gone for an alternative handicap, which you can do in Matchbook. And incidentally, it'd be the best place to do those sort of alternative handicaps right up until a few points up, both above and beyond. So currently 49ers -4.5 is around at 2.4. And this is a bet you're going to go with.
Yeah, I think you framed it perfectly. And the reason I'd go for an alternative handicap here is that I'm not so confident in the median, but I think the play is essentially that if we price this game at the end of last year, this is like where the spread would be. And I'd rather kind of take the plus money there on that account. But I'm not understanding two things. Number one, the Brock Purdy hate, or like, this is a guy who came in, did absolutely nothing but ball. I mean, he hasn't actually lost a game, and obviously quarterback wins are not exactly a thing. But in every metric that you look at for Purdy, he basically was just Jimmy Garoppolo, but had the ability to scramble. And I think with Kyle Shanahan at quarterback, and especially with the weapons, and missing George Kittle here would be a bit of a knock here. He doesn't need to do much. All he needs to do is kind of make the reads and get the ball out quickly. And that's exactly what he did. I did some research as like a proxy for quarterback decision-making, and looking at the percentage of throws that a quarterback throws to an open window, where a guy is open, versus a tight window where there's tight coverage or some defenders in the area. And Purdy was the very best in the NFL, actually. And most of that is Shanahan getting the guys open, and there aren't lots of tight windows to throw with, but we should expect that to be sticky. There's no reason why, Kyle Shanahan won't do what he's done for the past, 6-7 years in San Francisco. I also, the Steelers defense to me does not look like a positive unit. Sure, they have two good edge rushers and Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt's one of the best defensive players in the NFL, but like, they're trotting out Levi Wallace and Patrick Peterson at cornerback. Like, these guys have not been good since 2018. Very attackable matchups. And Purdy, I think, if anything, is going to get better, right? We see quarterbacks develop from years 1 to 2, and the areas in which Purdy struggled, which is a bit with not his accuracy, but kind of these turnover-worthy plays or throws that are tons of dropped interceptions, which was certainly true. But quarterbacks tend to get better from year 1 to year 2 in exactly that area. So I think when you look at it, we could have a completely different tier matchup. And I like the Steelers too relative to expectation, but I think there's a lot of projection we need to first see. We have a big sample size of the Niners completely dominating teams, and I think that will continue. One other point I'll make is that the team total here for the Niners is about 21. They scored about 27 points per game last year. So I like to kind of be able to source exactly where my disagreement is here, or where I can find some value. And like, this is a team that I think is being priced. Maybe it's the Steelers defense, maybe it's Brock Purdy. I don't see any of those two as being particularly sticky. I see this as a real chance that like, there's a big tier gap still between the Niners and the Steelers, and this line should really be like 4.5.
Okay, yeah, and that 49ers minus 4.5 for producer Ryan, just to update the price, 2.56, Judah. So we'll give you that at the time of recording. So Drew, it's up to you to be the neutral here, my man.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm noted Steelers lover this preseason, largely just because I think the AFC North is flat, and I just in general like the opportunity for Pickett to take a step forward this year. But this particular matchup to me spells trouble for the Niners in a couple of ways. And in the same sort of sense that, going for prices is kind of trying to capture some of the uncertainty. I think Steelers money line is the play at plus, 2.14 currently. And it comes down to a couple of key things. I'm not expecting Bosa to be available. I don't think that contract situation gets resolved in time for him to be out there on Sunday. And I don't think that George Kittle is going, because he's dealing with a groin injury. And by my count, that's two guys that could push over a lorry that will not be on the field for the San Francisco 49ers. In general, the idea that you have a quarterback in Brock Purdy, who I do believe in ultimately being kind of the perfect avatar for Shanahan on the field, and a guy that clearly does exactly what he's asked to do, exactly the way Shanahan wants to do it. And that's like synergy that you can't find anywhere else really across the NFC. I think he will ultimately get to that same level we saw him at in December of last year, but without Kittle, who was a little bit of a safety blanket for him, at least in terms of just kind of different targets, particularly over the middle of the field. I think that matters, and I think in general, Purdy without as much game time, without as much preseason reps as you would have hoped for, is potentially a little bit rusty in this contest, and he's going to be behind an offensive line that has only one standout player in Trent Williams. Now, Trent Williams is a future Hall of Famer, but the other four guys on this line, particularly on the right side of this line, are really, really question marks. And I think the pass rush for the Steelers can get after it, early and often in this one. And if the Steelers find success offensively, they could find themselves in a positive game state where their pass rush really becomes the differentiating factor in the second half of this game. And, you know, the questions and issues on the defensive side of the ball for the Steelers pretty clearly exist in the secondary. And I think, you know, the fact that Minkah Fitzpatrick is, you know, one of the best safeties in the league helps make up for some of the deficiencies at cornerback, although I have a higher grade on Patrick Peterson than it sounds like Judah does, but that's okay. The overall sentiment I get with the Steelers defense is that the strength of the front seven and the pass rush in particular could be the key factor here, particularly without George Kittle available. And it's weird to even have any kind of doubts in the Niners because, you know, as I kind of do like a synthesis of all of the players available in all the teams, the Niners have the best roster in the NFL. This is a team that I would be 0% surprised if they win the NFC, if they win the Super Bowl. Like, this is an extremely good team, well-coached team. But I think the rating that we will ultimately have for them come playoff time is going to be very different than what we're looking at heading into week one because of player availability and just because of, you know, the amount of reps and the amount of growth that I would expect that Purdy goes through in year two, as you know, he kind of comes off of what was a pretty significant surgery. So basically just counting on a little bit of rust. Not my favorite play on the board for the week, but I do think Steelers on the money line is the right side on this one.
Okay, now normally for the podcast, I will pick a selection out of the three guys. I'm not genuinely going to sit in the fence here because there's three really good cases there. We've got Steelers money line, Steelers money line, Steelers +2 for Sam, and Judah with 49ers -4.5. Which, if you were leaning that way, I would suggest doing that. So watch the Niners win by 3 or 4. That's usually how it works, and all three bets will be in the bin there. But